My best friend was drugged and assaulted by my younger brother. The entire family testified against me, claiming I was an accomplice because I had invited her over for dinner. To avoid prison and make amends, I gave her the house I had just bought. But only 6 months later, she gave birth to my brother's child. The two of them, along with my parents, were living happily in the house I had sacrificed for her. As it turned out, the assault was nothing but an elaborate scheme they orchestrated to take what was mine. When I confronted them to demand answers, they shoved me off the balcony. I died a gruesome death. The agony was unbearable, and everything faded into chaos. Then, in a twist I could never have imagined, my consciousness returned. The next thing I knew, the phone was ringing. On the other end of the line, her familiar voice echoed, "Emily, I'm coming over for dinner tomorrow. Is that okay?" It took a long moment to collect myself. Somehow, I had returned to the very beginning before their sinister plot unfolded. This time, I'll watch their performance and see exactly how they plan to take my house again. "Emily, I'm already at the entrance of your apartment complex," Sarah Collins' cheerful voice chimed through the phone, brimming with an excitement she didn't even try to hide. In the past, I might have believed she was genuinely happy for me. But after everything that happened in my previous life, I knew better. Her excitement was entirely self-serving. She wasn't celebrating me, she was thrilled about her imminent prize, my new house. Painful and chaotic memories of my past life rushed back, leaving me trembling with fear. Though those events belonged to another lifetime, the mere thought of being pushed off that balcony still sent searing pain through my core. I could vividly recall the sickening crunch of breaking bones and the warmth of blood pooling out of my body. Those fleeting seconds of agony stretched endlessly, their realism so vivid I couldn't stop wondering, what if it all happens again? Forcing myself to stay calm, I leaned against the balcony railing and looked out into the distance. That's when I spotted Sarah Collins entering the complex gates with my parents and my younger brother, Ethan Carter, trailing close behind. A chill ran down my spine, and my fear of this cursed balcony resurfaced. Seeing Sarah arm in arm with Ethan made everything painfully clear. They had known each other long before. Anger surged through me, momentarily clearing my mind. There was no time to run, they were already here. Grabbing my phone, I quickly recorded a video of Sarah and Ethan sharing an intimate kiss. Relief washed over me when I realized I had evidence. For some reason, once the initial panic subsided, it struck me they weren't nearly as terrifying as I'd once thought. This time, I wouldn't be the naive and helpless fool who lost a house and a life. A cold smile crept across my face as I saved the video. Not long after, the doorbell rang. Leaving the balcony, I headed downstairs to greet my guests. At the door stood Sarah Collins, alongside Ethan and my parents. Putting on a facade of surprise, I opened the door wider. "Emily," Sarah began, her voice eager. I ran into them at the entrance. "They said they're your parents and brother, so I brought them up with me. I hope you don't mind." My parents had always favored my brother, and I'd kept my distance from them for years. Once, they even caused a scene at my office, demanding money and humiliating me in front of my colleagues. It had taken considerable effort to get them to stop harassing me. As for Sarah and Ethan, it was now obvious their connection predated everything. In my past life, I had foolishly believed Sarah's lies and refrained from confronting her in front of others. But now, things were different. I had no concern for appearances anymore. My only goal was to confirm my suspicions. Expression darkening, I turned to Sarah. "My parents and brother have shown up at my office countless times. How could you not recognize them? Weren't you the one who said people like them don't deserve to be parents and that they'd be better off dead? Did you forget?" Sarah's face paled. My parents shot her disapproving glances, their expressions souring. Stammering, she tried to defend herself. "Emily, I never said that. You must be mistaken. I was just trying to be nice by bringing your family here. Are you upset because you didn't want to see them?" She shifted the blame onto me, and Ethan immediately chimed in. "Exactly, sis. You didn't even tell us you bought a house. We came here to congratulate you, and this is how you treat us? Mom and Dad even brought a gift for you, but you're acting so ungrateful." Before I could respond, Ethan strode inside, placing their gift on the coffee table, a bag of poor quality millet mixed with sand, the kind used for feeding chickens. As I inspected it, my mother snapped, "What are you looking at? This is organic and homegrown. It's expensive in the city. We didn't even keep any for ourselves and brought it here for you. Be grateful." Meanwhile, my father and Ethan wandered around, pointing at various things as if it were already their home. Sarah, likely eager to regain favor, chimed in, "Emily, your parents are so good to you. They're nothing like what you've said about them." My mother immediately turned her attention to me. "Emily, what have you been saying about me?" Sarah gleefully added fuel to the fire, twisting past conversations and embellishing them to paint me in the worst light. By the time she finished, both my parents' faces were stormy with anger. In my past life, my father's temper would have exploded into physical violence. But this time, Ethan leaned in and whispered something to him, diffusing the situation. I understood their hesitation. They didn't want me injured. Without me, their charade would fall apart. Feigning sorrow, Sarah offered, "Emily," I spoke out of turn. "You're not mad at me, are you?" Smiling, I replied, "Why would I be mad? We're best friends, aren't we?" Her gaze sharpened, seeing me as easy prey. But if she looked closer, she'd notice my eyes mirrored hers, calculating and predatory. After dinner, they conveniently found excuses to stay the night. Unlike before, I welcomed the idea, a calm determination settling over me. Each of them radiated eagerness, unaware that the moment they stepped through my door, their plan had already started to unravel. My parents shared one room. Ethan Carter slept on the couch in the living room, and I shared a bed with Sarah Collins. In the dead of night, I heard the faint creak of Sarah tiptoeing out of bed. Pretending to be asleep, I waited. Moments later, a piercing scream shattered the silence, sending everyone rushing to the living room. There, on the sofa, Sarah and Ethan lay completely naked. Sarah covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably, while Ethan wore a smug grin. Through her tears, Sarah pointed a trembling finger at Ethan. "How could you do this to me? I'm your sister's best friend." Ethan leaned back, his smirk deepening. "If you weren't her best friend, how else would I have tricked you so easily? If you hadn't trusted her, would you have come here just because of a dinner invitation?" Realization seemed to dawn on Sarah, tears streaming down her face as she turned her fury toward me. Her voice shook with accusation. "Emily Carter, I trusted you as my best friend. And you plotted with your family to assault me? I'm calling the police. I'll make sure you all end up in prison." In my past life, I had been too paralyzed to respond. With no evidence and my family pinning the blame on me, I'd been powerless to convince Sarah of the truth. Fear had kept me from reporting the incident, leading to the loss of everything: my property, my job, my life as I knew it. But this time was different. I countered immediately. "Ethan Carter, what did you just say? Something about her being my best friend and that's why it was easy to trick her? Care to explain that in detail?" Ethan met my gaze, unfazed, his lips curling into a mocking smile. "It's too late to play innocent. You invited her over, got her drunk. Wasn't that all to give me an opportunity?" At his words, Sarah's cries grew louder. "Emily Carter, I treated you like family, like a sister. And this is how you repay me? I came here out of kindness to have dinner with you, and you conspired with your brother to destroy me. I won't forgive you." My parents shared one room. Ethan Carter slept on the living room couch, and I shared a bed with Sarah Collins. In the middle of the night, the faint creak of Sarah quietly slipping out of bed reached my ears. Pretending to be asleep, I waited. Moments later, a loud scream pierced the silence, sending everyone running to the living room. There, on the sofa, Sarah and Ethan lay completely naked. Sarah clutched her face, sobbing hysterically, while Ethan smirked smugly. Between broken cries, Sarah pointed at Ethan, her voice shaking with rage. "How could you do this to me? I'm your sister's best friend." Ethan chuckled darkly. "If you weren't her best friend, how else would I have tricked you so easily? If you hadn't trusted her, you wouldn't have come here over a simple dinner invite. Realization seemed to hit Sarah like a bolt of lightning. Tears streamed down her face as she turned on me, her voice trembling with fury. Emily Carter, I trusted you. And you plotted with your family to assault me? I'm calling the police. I'll make sure all of you rot in jail. In my past life, fear had silenced me. Without evidence and under the weight of my family's lies, I'd been helpless to defend myself. Sarah hadn't listened, and I'd been too scared to involve the police, which ultimately cost me my house, my job, and everything I had. But this time was different. I shot back instantly. Ethan Carter, what was that you just said? Something about her being my best friend and that's why it was easy to trick her? Care to explain in detail? Ethan met my gaze, unfazed, a smug grin tugging at his lips. It's too late to pretend. You invited her over and got her drunk, wasn't that all to give me an opportunity? Sarah's wails grew louder. Emily Carter, I treated you like a sister. And this is what you do to me? I came here out of kindness, and you and your brother plotted against me. I won't forgive you. Her hands fumbled for her phone, but my parents snatched it away and threw it off the balcony. They immediately began pleading with her. Please, Sarah, think this through, my mother begged. If you go to the police, both of our children will lose their futures. We're begging you. My father chimed in, look, Ethan's not that bad. Why not just be with him? Desperate, Sarah slapped Ethan hard across the face before lunging at me, her nails aimed for my skin. But I wasn't the same as before. Before she could lay a hand on me, I slapped her so hard she fell to the ground. Clutching her cheek, she glared up at me, seething. Emily Carter, you set me up and now you're hitting me? I'll make your entire family pay for this. Throwing away my phone won't help. What next? Are you planning to kill me? The moment I walk out that door, I'll make sure you all end up behind bars. My parents turned their anger toward me. At a time like this, you're making it worse by provoking Sarah. Are you trying to send us all to jail? They hurried to calm Sarah down. After half an hour of negotiating, a deal was struck. We'll compensate Sarah Collins $200,000, and she'll drop everything. Through it all, Ethan lounged on the couch, as if none of it concerned him. When the arrangement was finalized, my parents turned to me with their demands. Emily, we've raised you your whole life. You owe us. You'll have to come up with the $200,000. A bitter laugh escaped me. Do you seriously think I have $200,000? My father's voice rose in anger. No money? And yet you bought a house this big? I heard you paid for it all in cash. Sarah, of course, knew the truth, and I saw no point in denying it. I had indeed paid up front for the house, leaving me with nothing else. Without hesitation, my father declared, then we'll give Sarah the house as compensation. Before I could respond, Sarah's voice cut through, dripping with disdain. This house is only worth $150,000, and the location and decor don't suit me. I won't accept it. My mother quickly stepped in. But the furnishings and appliances cost extra. You're not losing out. Please, Sarah, take pity on us. This house is all we have. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed, and the three of them congratulated themselves on reaching an agreement. I couldn't hold back anymore. Excuse me, did I miss something? I haven't agreed to any of this. And, by the way, didn't you just say this house is all you have? What about the one you still own in the countryside? Ethan's smug expression finally cracked. His voice turned cold. Emily Carter, what are you saying? You're a daughter, while I'm the heir of the Carter family. What's yours is mine. Haven't Mom and Dad always taught you that? Or did a few years away from home make you forget your place? The audacity left me speechless. Sarah let out a theatrical sigh. Clearly, your family can't agree on anything. I guess I'll just have to call the police. Hearing that, my mother spun toward me, jabbing a finger into my forehead. You stupid girl. Can't you think straight? If Sarah calls the cops, you'll lose everything, jail or money, which will it be? I stared at her, incredulous. Why would I go to jail? I've done nothing wrong. In my past life, I'd believed my family was only trying to pin the blame on me to make me pay the compensation. It wasn't until the end, when death was closing in, that I realized they'd all been in on it and Sarah Collins had orchestrated the entire scheme. Sarah didn't deny it this time, only pressed harder to call the police. I knew the moment she did, the three of them would drag me down to save themselves. But not this time. I stood firm. My father finally lost patience. Dragging my mother aside, he growled, "Enough talking. She's always been stubborn. A good beating will fix that." He reached for his belt, raising it high, but just then, the doorbell rang. They froze, glancing at each other in confusion. "Who's showing up at this hour?" my mother snapped. "Emily Carter, did you bring a man home? Are you sleeping with him already? Do you know what that'll do to your value? No dowry for you, that's for sure." Ignoring their disgusting words, I opened the door. Two police officers stood there, their faces serious. "Who called the police?" Inside, everyone was stunned except me. I turned to Sarah, smiling. "Wasn't this what you wanted? I went ahead and helped you. No need to thank me." The once arrogant group fell silent, but I didn't stop. "Officers, my best friend just accused my brother of assaulting her. She's scared and hesitant to speak, but I have video evidence. Please, take a look." Handing over the video I'd secretly recorded, I watched as the officers reviewed it, their expressions hardening. "This is a serious matter," one said. "We'll need backup to escort everyone to the station for further investigation." And just like that, we were all taken to the police station. At the police station, the accusations flew in perfect harmony. Both sides were quick to pin the blame on me as the mastermind. Ethan Carter declared, "It was my sister, Emily Carter, who drugged me. I lost control, and that's how this happened. I'm a victim too." Sarah Collins, sobbing, chimed in, "Emily Carter and I never got along at work, but I never imagined she'd be so cruel, luring me to her house so her brother could assault me." My parents joined in without hesitation. "It's all Emily Carter's fault. She planned everything with Ethan." A cold laugh escaped me as I responded, "If Ethan Carter really assaulted Sarah Collins, whether or not I'm the mastermind, he'd still face criminal charges and go to prison. Are you absolutely sure this was assault?" At this, hesitation flickered across their faces. My parents and Ethan exchanged nervous glances. Sarah's sobs grew louder. "Emily Carter, I treated you as a friend, and instead of showing remorse, you're trying to intimidate us? How can you be so heartless? If I write a letter of pardon and drop the charges, your brother won't go to jail. But here you are, trying to twist our words." With this, my parents and Ethan regained their resolve and doubled down on their claims that I was the mastermind. Calmly, I pressed further. "Didn't you just say that if I handed over my house, Sarah wouldn't pursue the matter? Now that I've refused, she'll press charges, right? And if she does, doesn't that mean Ethan Carter will end up in jail?" Panic crept into my mother's eyes as she turned to Sarah, pleading desperately. "Sweetheart, don't worry. We'll make sure you get the house. Please, just don't press charges against my son." Sarah, however, wasn't satisfied. Her voice sharpened. "A house isn't enough to make up for the damage you've caused me. Add $50,000 in cash, and I'll consider letting it go." I let out a dry laugh and spoke slowly. "A house worth $150,000, plus $50,000 for furniture and decor, and another $50,000 in cash. That's $250,000 in total. Extorting $250,000. Seems like a surefire way to land a decade or more in prison, wouldn't you say?" Sarah's eyes widened as she stammered, "This isn't extortion. It's compensation." Without missing a beat, I pulled out my phone and handed it to the police officers. "Officers, here's a video I happened to record from my balcony earlier today. Please take a look." The footage showed Sarah and Ethan kissing. As the video played, all four of them, Sarah, Ethan, and my parents, turned pale. Sarah tried to explain, her voice trembling. "This was just. I happened to run into her parents, and her brother couldn't control himself when he saw me. This doesn't prove anything about a premeditated plan." I fixed Sarah with a cold stare, my gaze dropping briefly to her stomach. And what about the baby you're carrying? How do you explain that? Chaos erupted. Sarah instinctively clutched her belly, backing away, while my parents and Ethan gawked at me in shock. How did you know? Sarah stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Cornered, she had no choice but to stay silent. Turning to the officers, I smiled. It seems everything is clear now. These people conspired to extort money and seize my property. Please handle this matter according to the law. Furious and humiliated, Sarah screamed, Emily Carter, how did you know? Glancing at my mother, I replied coolly, someone who couldn't bear to see me falsely accused told me. After all, I am family. Did you really think no one cared about me? Suspicion clouded my father and Ethan's expressions as they turned on my mother. Despite her frantic denials, their eyes grew colder. I knew the truth from my past life, it was my mother who had pushed me off the balcony. My words were calculated revenge served cold. My father would never forgive her. Since the extortion plot hadn't succeeded, Ethan and the others pinned the blame solely on my mother, claiming she'd orchestrated everything and coerced them into going along. While they were let off with a stern warning, my mother wasn't so lucky and was held in custody. To prevent my father's anger from subsiding with time, I pretended to forgive her and chose not to press charges. She was released soon after. Realizing the police were still watching, my family quickly bought train tickets back to the countryside. My father, furious, dragged my mother by the hair onto the train. The fear in her eyes was genuine. As for me, I simply turned away. Ethan stayed behind, claiming he wanted to spend more time with Sarah. She, feigning hesitation, suggested, my parents don't know about us yet. If they see you, it might be awkward. Why not stay with your sister for a few days? Feigning distress, I turned to the officers. I'm scared. These people just tried to extort me. If he stays in my home, what if he kills me for the house? The officers sternly warned Ethan, barring him from going anywhere near my home and threatening immediate arrest if he did. I knew it was an empty threat, but I appreciated the gesture. Sarah tried to embolden him. They're just bluffing. Don't let it scare you. But Ethan wasn't willing to risk it. Clinging to Sarah, he began to realize she wasn't the savior he'd imagined. All I had to do was sit back and watch them destroy each other. Sarah, though still trying to keep up appearances, was clearly losing her composure. She urged Ethan, why don't you ask your sister for some money to rent a hotel for a few days? Don't make this harder on me. I couldn't resist a cold laugh. Didn't you just get paid over $3,000? Isn't that enough for a hotel? Without waiting for a response, I walked away, leaving them to their mess. By now, their entire scheme was laid bare, and I understood that the best way to free myself from their web was to let them tear each other apart. In my mind, a plan was already forming. Sarah had never truly loved Ethan. Her sights were set on my house. Our shared background of being raised in patriarchal families was what had initially brought us together as friends. But while I fought to escape the control of my family, Sarah embraced it wholeheartedly. She once told me, Emily, don't push your family away too much. You'll end up alone. I had scoffed at her advice, urging her instead to break free from her own family's control. When I finally bought my house, Sarah couldn't hide her resentment. She didn't believe I deserved it and saw my success as a threat. From that moment, she had aligned herself with Ethan, and together, they'd set their sights on my home. Thinking of Sarah's manipulative nature, I allowed myself a cold smile. The next morning, I took half a day off work and went to visit Sarah Collins' parents. They greeted me warmly, unaware that I had come with a different agenda. Posing as Sarah's close colleague and best friend, I arrived with generous gifts. As the saying goes, a smiling face is rarely slapped. After some small talk, I hesitated, then said, Sir, ma'am, I'm here today to thank you. Thank you for raising such an exceptional daughter like Sarah Collins and for agreeing to let her marry into my family as my brother's wife. My words left them stunned. Pretending not to notice their confusion, I continued, my family's situation isn't great. My parents are unreasonable, my brother is jobless, and he relies on everyone else. He barely finished middle school and didn't even complete trade school. Honestly, he doesn't deserve someone as remarkable as Sarah. She has beauty, brains, and a good job. She could have any man she wanted. Why would she settle for someone like my brother? Their stunned expressions gradually shifted. The more I revealed about my family's situation, the more their faces darkened. When they learned that my parents had no pension or means to provide a proper dowry, they grew visibly agitated and unceremoniously kicked me out. Before leaving, I added with a sly smile, "Remember, even swans sometimes end up with toads." Watching their furious expressions as I walked away, a sense of satisfaction filled me. My plan had only just begun, and I knew they wouldn't let this go. When I returned to the office, the atmosphere felt off. Colleagues exchanged strange glances, their eyes brimming with suspicion. It didn't take long to confirm my suspicions. Sarah Collins had already spread malicious rumors about me. A friendly coworker hesitantly pulled me aside to explain. "Sarah's been saying you're involved with one of our biggest clients, a married man. She claims that's how you landed your recent contracts. Apparently, he's bought you a house and you're just one of his many mistresses. Everyone's been worried about you but didn't know how to bring it up." I laughed out loud at her audacity. Wasting no time, I walked straight to Sarah, who was surrounded by a few colleagues, continuing her smear campaign. Tapping her shoulder, I made her jump. She spun around, startled, and met my gaze. I spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Sarah Collins, I've always treated you as a close friend, even a future sister-in-law. We're practically family, and yet you stoop to spreading lies about me? Sure, I don't think my brother is good enough for you, but does that justify this level of resentment? Besides, you're already pregnant with his child. Did you think I'd stand in the way of your marriage into my family?" The office fell into stunned silence. Everyone knew about my family's history of causing trouble at work, so no one doubted my claims. The revelation that Sarah was involved with my brother unpregnant left them shocked. It took Sarah a few moments to collect herself. Trembling with anger, she pointed at me. "Emily Carter, what nonsense are you spouting?" Feigning confusion, I replied, "Didn't you just spend the night with my brother? You even accused both of us of drugging and assaulting you, demanded compensation, and caused such a scene that we ended up at the police station. Have you forgotten? You admitted you're carrying his child. If you weren't trying to extort me, why would I stay silent?" I glanced at Michael Turner, our department head, whose reputation for shady behavior was well known. His uneasy expression and Sarah's panicked glances confirmed my suspicions they'd been involved for a while. Sarah's recent success at work undoubtedly had his fingerprints all over it. Sarah's tension was palpable. She alternated between hurling insults at me and stealing desperate glances at Michael, but he offered no support. Instead, he turned and walked away without a word. Before Sarah could react further, a thunderous voice erupted from the office entrance. "Sarah Collins! I raised you, arranged your engagement, and now you disgrace me like this? Pregnant by another man? Where's my pride?" Everyone turned to see a furious middle-aged man storming toward her. It was Sarah's father. He grabbed her by the hair and slapped her hard, twice, leaving her nose and mouth bleeding and one side of her face swollen. The office watched in stunned silence. I quietly stepped back into the crowd, observing the scene unfold. Sarah's mother rushed in, trying to stop him. "Don't hit her. If this gets out, it'll be even harder to fix. What if her fiancé finds out?" Her words seemed to save Sarah for a moment, but she screamed, "Fiancé? I'm not marrying anyone. If you're so eager, marry him yourselves. Matthew Howard just got out of prison for killing his wife. Are you trying to send me to my death?" The name Matthew Howard sent a chill down my spine. It was a name infamous for a high-profile murder case. I couldn't believe her parents had chosen him as her fiancé. Unbothered, her mother replied, "It was manslaughter, not murder. He's reformed, and his family is rich and powerful. If you have his child, they'll take care of you for life." Sarah let out a bitter laugh, her eyes filled with despair. "If my past weren't so dirty, you'd never have considered me for this. You've never treated me as your daughter, just a tool. But let me tell you now, I'm not marrying him. If you're so desperate, marry him yourselves. Her father raised his hand to strike her again, but her mother held him back. At that moment, Ethan Carter burst in, standing protectively in front of Sarah. Don't hit her. Sarah's carrying my child. You can't force her to marry someone else. Her father sneered. Your child? That's nothing but a lump of flesh. Only a true family heir would be my grandchild. Look at yourself. What makes you think you're good enough to marry my daughter? With that, he kicked Ethan to the ground. Ethan writhed in pain but didn't dare fight back. She's pregnant with my baby. You can't do this, it's your grandchild. Ignoring him, Sarah's father dragged her out of the office. She struggled and screamed, but her strength was no match for his. Her mother followed, cold and unfeeling. 2 days later, I heard through a co-worker that Sarah's parents had taken her to a private hospital for an abortion. Rumor had it the procedure went wrong, causing excessive bleeding that left her infertile. Word spread that Matthew Howard's family had bribed the doctors as revenge for her family's antics. Her parents, furious at losing their golden ticket, turned on each other, further fracturing their already fragile relationship. Sarah, overwhelmed by despair, turned to Ethan for comfort. Despite his anger over her past betrayal, he couldn't resist her pleas. They decided to live together, clinging to the remnants of their shattered lives. Meanwhile, my parents returned after weeks of silence, not for the house this time, but to persuade me to accept Ethan and Sarah's relationship. Emily, she was your best friend, my mother pleaded. No one else will take her now. Letting them live together in your house will solve everything. I smiled faintly, refusing to respond. Inside, I knew this was the perfect moment to execute the final step of my plan. A few days later, I received an unexpected call from the police. The officer on the line informed me that Ethan Carter had been found dead in a rural hotel. His body was discovered in a horrifying state, covered in wounds. The initial investigation suggested that he had been killed during a violent altercation related to unpaid debts. My parents were devastated, but I felt nothing but relief. Ethan Carter, who had played a significant role in ruining my previous life, had finally met his reckoning. Meanwhile, Sarah Collins' life fared no better. After losing her ability to have children, her parents forced her back to their rural home, where she lived under the scornful eyes of neighbors. Not long after, she found a way to contact me, begging for help. When I met her, she looked frail and broken, her once bright eyes filled with desperation. This time, I didn't coldly refuse. Instead, I smiled and said, "Sarah Collins, you once claimed we were best friends. If that's true, I'll help you one last time." Her eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope, though she had no idea that this help would also be our final goodbye. I handed her enough money to leave the village and start over in another city. Tears welled up in her eyes as she repeatedly thanked me. "Emily, thank you. I knew you still considered me your best friend. I'll never forget this kindness." I simply smiled, offering no response. Deep down, I knew this money wasn't meant to help, it was to push her out of my life for good. Before boarding the bus, she turned to me and said, "Emily, you're the only one willing to help me now. If I manage to build a better life, I'll come back to repay your kindness." I watched her climb into the bus, my expression calm and unreadable. There was no fear of her return. I knew she would never have the chance. 2 months later, news reached me that Sarah Collins had been arrested for her involvement in a fraud scheme in her new city. It turned out she had used the money I gave her to fund the scam, only to be betrayed and reported by one of her accomplices. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Reading about it, I took a sip of tea, feeling nothing but quiet satisfaction. As for my parents, Ethan Carter's death marked the end of their attempts to contact me. Under the weight of public scorn in their small town, they retreated into a quiet existence in their run-down home. Neighbors occasionally shared that my mother could often be seen crying alone, while my father had grown uncharacteristically withdrawn. Once, they had viewed their children as tools to exploit, and now they were left with only each other to endure. I focused my energy on work, carving out a peaceful life for myself. The agonizing turmoil of my past life seemed to fade further into the distance with each passing day. Yet, whenever I stood on the balcony, gazing at the lush garden below, memories of what had transpired would resurface. Not all of it was a nightmare. Those painful experiences taught me a priceless lesson: no one can live your life for you, and no one can take your happiness unless you allow it. One breezy afternoon, as I sat in the home I had nearly lost, savoring a cup of hot coffee, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I answered, and a voice on the other end spoke. "Hello, Ms. Emily Carter. I'm a lawyer representing the real estate firm. I'm pleased to inform you that all the paperwork has been finalized, and this house is now fully under your name. Congratulations." A smile spread across my face as my gaze drifted to the horizon. Life, it seemed, always held unexpected twists. But this time, I would savor the tranquility I had fought so hard to reclaim. A year later, my life had completely settled. The haunting memories of the past no longer clung to me. Instead, I embraced the peace of my home, spending my days working, tending to my small garden, and finding joy in life's simplest pleasures. One morning, as I watered the flowers, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Standing on the other side was a well-dressed middle-aged man holding a folder. "Good morning, Ms. Emily Carter," he began. "I'm a private investigator hired to look into matters involving your family. There's some information I believe you should know." Surprised but curious, I invited him inside. He opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents and photographs. Among them was a handwritten letter and a sworn statement from my mother. "Your mother left this letter before she passed away," he explained. "She wanted to confess everything and ask for your forgiveness." The letter's jagged handwriting seemed heavy with regret. In it, my mother admitted that she, along with my father and Ethan Carter, had conspired to take my house. She recounted, however, that in the moment she pushed me from the balcony in my previous life, hesitation had gripped her. Yet the pressure from my father and Ethan had kept her from stopping. "Emily," the letter read, "I know you will never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But you are the only child I ever felt proud of. If there is a next life, I hope I will have the courage to be a mother worthy of you." Setting the letter down, a wave of complex emotions swept over me. The investigator then handed me a photograph of our family from years ago. In it, Ethan, my parents, and I stood together, bright smiles lighting up every face. Briefly, rare moments of tenderness from my childhood resurfaced. Yet, they only served as a reminder that the past couldn't be undone. What I needed now was to let go. A few months later, a lawyer called to inform me that my parents had left all their rural property and a modest savings account to me in their will. The news stirred no emotion, and I had no intention of keeping any of it. I decided to donate everything to a charity, severing the final threads that tied me to my family. From that point on, I never returned to my hometown. My life resumed its tranquil rhythm. Occasionally, as I sat on the balcony overlooking the lush garden below, I reflected on how the pain of the past had become the foundation for my new life. No longer weighed down by hatred or schemes, I had finally found true freedom.